Hey everybody, welcome to Quick Tip Thursday. Today what I want to do is give you some tips for top stitching on Ponte knit fabric. It's a little bit of a challenge because we're working with heavy top stitching thread, so we need to use a top stitch needle, and the fabric we're trying to top stitch on stretches and has give. So the results I've been getting have not been fabulous. It kind of depends on which direction you're sewing in to the amount of fabulosity I've achieved just from stitching. This sample right here, you can see it's, I have skip stitches and they don't look great. They're very loose. The seam still stretches, but I'm not happy with the way that stitching looks, and the bobbin thread is actually coming up a little bit. So this is what happens when you top stitch across the grain of the fabric, so with the stretch. And that seems to be the most challenging direction to sew in. So that's how that looks just by top stitching through 3 layers. The top layer and 2 seam allowances. This is an example of how the stitching looks when you're stitching perpendicular to the direction of the stretch. So there's some give, not as much, and you can see that the seam is nicer. So with no fussing, it really doesn't look that bad. But the only places that you're going to do this type of top stitching is along your inseam and maybe a little bit on the side seam to hold down your pocket seam allowances. Most of your top stitching goes across the stretch, with the stretch of your fabric, like when you're hemming your jeans, when you're doing the back yoke, and the waistband. Those are all places where the top stitching is really noticeable. And skip stitches or loose stitches, looks homemade. It doesn't look, really ready to wear professional. So I thought about it and I thought, well, maybe if I stabilize the edge of the fabric, it would help. And so what I did was, I know that you can buy rolls of 3/8 inch or 1/2 inch fusible stretchy tape to work with. I'll research that, but in the quick, I basically just cut out bias strips of my cotton fuse, and what I did was, same exact fabric, I just fused, you can see I did it right here, and then I made sure that I did it on the side where the seam allowances are going to cover it. So it's not going to be visible on the inside of your jeans because I'm using the seam allowance to hide it. And then from the right side, it's actually stabilizing the face of the fabric. Because I did it on the bias, this fabric still stretches, see? So I didn't really create a situation where I was stopping the fabric from stretching, but I did stabilize it. And I also did it on the lengthwise. So there's a lengthwise version. So let's just top stitch and see what happens, and then we'll compare. All right, so let me do the cross grain first. And I'm just setting my machine up for a 5 stitch length. When you top stitch, you want to make your top tension a little bit higher. So I moved it to almost 6. Let's see how this comes out. All right, let's compare that. All right, so the top one is with the stabilizer. It looks really even. There's no skip stitches. So this is a huge improvement. It just sewed smoother, and the seam, I think, is much nicer. This looks really professional to me. So I'm really happy with the result of that, and that'll be a tip that I'll include in the pattern instructions in my final version to, stabilize the edges. Let's try it on the lengthwise grain now. I'm interested to see if it really makes a big difference or not. All right, let's see. All right, here's my two seams, and I think the stitch quality may be a little better, but what I'm really noticing here is neither one of these are pressed, and I noticed that the top stitching along the unstabilized edge is a little bit stretched out just a little bit. You can see the little ripples. And notice on the one that I did fuse that interfacing, look how nice and flat it is. I didn't iron that at all. So even though it doesn't make as huge of a difference in the stitch quality, I think it makes a nicer seam because it's not rippling without pressings. All right, so I'm super excited about these results because top stitching is one of the most important details in a pair of jeans. If you have nice professional looking top stitching, then your jeans are going to look nice and professional as well. So I'm going to take the time to stabilize all the edges and all the places where I'm going to be top stitching on my Ponte knit for my next pair, and I think they're going to look amazing. So you might want to consider doing that. I'm going to include these instructions with the pattern, and I'll know where you would need to stabilize with each step that needs it, so you won't have to guess. And of course, if you're working on a pattern that isn't my pattern, or a knit garment that's not even jeans, let's say you're making a Ponte knit jacket, you know, this would be perfect for that as well. So that's my quick tip for today. If you have any questions or comments, you know, please feel free to visit my blog and post one there, or you can post one below the video. I'm going to get better at trying to remember to look there. I always say to post one there, and then I'm so busy sometimes I forget to go back and check, but I'm sorry that I forgot to do that to a couple of you ladies, but I want you to know I'm reforming myself, and I'm going to make sure I check comments everywhere. And that's it for today. So I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I will see you next week for JSD TV on Tuesday.